DL Q&A side of the presentation. So just a few housekeeping. Obviously, this is a Q&A. Active participation is encouraged. This is a forum where you can ask questions from the DL team if you want to give comments on what you see out there in the industry today. This is also a really good opportunity to get that out there. If you do have any questions, please do put them in the Q&A. You will see that at the top of your screen, and submit them to the team, and the team will be asking Marco, and also we have a guest presenter today, Corey Officer from our Cape team, who will be talking about the compliance side of DL and Ontario One Call. So if you have questions, please put them in. As I say, it is encouraged that you bring them to the forefront. If you're thinking about these things, there's a very good chance that someone else is also thinking about them, or perhaps other people haven't thought about them, but it's important information for them to know as well. So this is a really good opportunity for us to have a conversation amongst all of us and to spread our experiences. So I'm just going to kick it off today, and then I'm going to hand it over to Marco. But I just wanted to talk about a regulatory consultation that the Ministry of Public and Business Service Delivery and Procurement, which is the ministry that oversees Ontario One Call, is currently holding. Now, this consultation is in respects to potential exemptions with dedicated locator and the designated broadband projects. We are looking for feedback from all stakeholders, or I should say the ministry are. So please do go in. The team are going to post a link in the chat in just a few moments. I do encourage you, if you haven't seen this posting, it is in the regulatory register. I do encourage you to go in, have a look at the posting, and if you do have any questions, comments, or indeed if you have written feedback, please do submit them to the ministry. Again, that's the Ministry of Public and Service Delivery and Procurement. Please do submit that feedback to them. The closing date is August the 13th, so in a couple of weeks' time. But your opinion is really important to the ministry to understand if and how exemptions should play a role in dedicated locator when designated projects, broadband projects, are taking place. So please have a look at that and submit your feedback. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Marco Detour, the supervisor of the dedicated locator team. Marco, over to you.
All right, thank you, Adam. Thank you for giving us your blessings for this month's Q&A and starting off our Q&A here. Just wanted to do a recap for our last two sessions. We've been blessed with several key speakers. So we want to look at May's session here, where we saw Ledcor Group take their journey as a constructor, and taking their experience to gain experience through subcontracting, locate services for their own projects, to positioning themselves as a DLSP. We saw how they're able to get their insight or approach on becoming a DLSP for their own projects, and how they're able to incorporate quality assurance and control and additional field support in place to meet the satisfaction of underground infrastructure owners. So definitely we learn a lot from that perspective, seeing it from a DLSP and also as a project owner all at once in that presentation. And from last month's presentation, we are able to get a point of view to an infrastructure owner, a high-risk infrastructure owner with Hydro One, where we're able to see their DL process, and how they take on the response framework that they built themselves when receiving a DL notice. We're to a point where they received the notice, to providing the mapping and information to the DLSP. We got a sneak peek into their onboarding process, how to utilize, the framework, preparedness and documentation, contracts and such like that. Obviously that helps them better position themselves to being compliant in terms of the timelines that's provided onto the legislation when answering to a DL notice. Not only to stay in compliance, they also shared their benefits and improvements to safety in terms of that, with seeing multiple large-scale projects shifting into DL. So once again, like one of the several key takeaways there is that from both speakers that we have heard, DL program really fosters a collaborative environment where the DLSP excavators and yourself as infrastructure owners work closely, ensuring safer excavation practice. This synergy not only promotes safety, but also contributes to minimizing damages to across, these large scale projects, right? And so we're not only just talking about delivering timely locates on time and different ways of providing that and to when and where it's required. This is not just about delivering locusts. This is about minimizing damages as well too, and we're looking at safety itself. With each one of you guys, joining us each month, you are taking the learnings, understanding, takeaways, and having those directions, direct conversation with multiple stakeholders, ourselves, to better prepare yourself to the DL process. Understanding the time frame to what it takes for each stages, then sharing those experience and knowledges. Just what Adam said here, this is a forum for you to share those knowledges and experiences, and hence we're trying to get more and more people to speak, to share those knowledges, right? It is a testament to the value of the partnership and communication that we're achieving industry wide as a progress of the DL program. So just give you a bit of an update, just the typical updates that we provide you month to month. What we're seeing here is a similar trend pattern as last year. We see a dip after a peak month within the dig season. Where we're seeing, and some of the feedbacks where we're seeing, is more efficiencies on how locates are requested to the DL, which is very important. From previous years, we're still getting multiple contractors where, the standard process of submitting locates and is just pretty much submitting all locates through in hopes to getting one or two or three of them in time for their projects. DL really shifts that around to when and where you require it. So really the locates are being submitted to when it's required and it's completed to when it's required. So that's where we're seeing a bit of a shift, not because of usage and submission of locates. It's more we're seeing a shift for more efficiencies of how these project owners and contractors are submitting these locates to the system, utilizing the full capabilities of DL, right? From the previous slide here, there's more hands-on between the project owner and the DLSP working hand in hand on that one. Once again, it's when and where it's required, right? Project owners are not having to juggle around locate packages with inconsistent expiration date with multiple infrastructure owners. Now with DL, they have a unified expiration date. So this is 60 days. So that's where we're seeing a bit of a trend pattern this year, and we're seeing that stabilize throughout the year. What I want to share with you here in this slide here is something new that we provided to you. Is the dotted line here is the conversion rate between, what are being submitted to the DL program from our standard locate requests. From where you see most of the peaks for the DL program is that the peaks are happening through off-peak seasons. What that really tells us is that dedicated locator and projects utilizing dedicated locators are working year-round and utilizing the system, utilizing their capabilities and such like that to off-peak hours, off-peak seasons, and working all through the year. So that really illustrates that into this, and we want to really accentuate to show that into a graph here with you guys and how that levels up to our locate requests submitted to the program. So just in another project update and submission, last month I provided you guys an update of this numbers as well. So since last month, we reported 33 year-to-date submission. Now we have 40, so 7 more submissions came through in the past month. 3 of those have been added on to submissions that are still on track. 6 of them are delayed. That's one addition from last month. So those are several projects that we're still working along with multiple factors with DLSPs and infrastructure owners to kind of progress forward with those projects. But there's definitely some traction in moving forward to those ones. And the final piece here is we saw 3 more activated projects that have gone through since our last reported. So it's a great start from that sense. Keep in mind, this is only year to date, so this is only indicating numbers for this year. So there are multiple projects as well too from last year's or previous years that are still continuously ongoing. These are just numbers of submissions and projects that have started for this year. Here's a list again, just giving you a quick brief update. This is something very important for you guys as infrastructure owners to who and which DLSPs are being put forward to the submissions. So some of these names are very familiar to you guys, or some of these you've seen in recent notices. The ones that are highlighted in yellow are the ones that are still in progress right now. So they're going through the approval process where they have received a project owner that provided them and put them forward as a proposed DLSP for their project. So they're going through the approval process at the moment. moment. So, good takeaway in this, each month we are seeing more and more come through, seeing more resources become available, and also seeing these approvals going through across the board here. So definitely an improvement across the board. So we talked about it in the past. We've seen multiple industry roadblocks that halts or delay the process. Now, with various improvements, we've seen, since then we've seen various improvements that come across, from the mapping, the contracts and such. And there's definitely improvements, and that attests to these sessions that we have. This attests to communications we have to multiple stakeholders and such. So there is definitely a collaborative effort in there, right? So with the mappings, some of the improvements we've seen, there's the collaborative effort that, working with DLSPs. There's some unique coordinations that we've seen between all parties to provide, information that's required to complete the locate. We also saw improvements in, with prepared contracts and agreements. In most cases, we see the DLSP and underground infrastructure owners working out the terms. But once again, this is not part of the legislative requirement. But we are seeing the DLSPs and underground infrastructure owners working their ways out to those negotiations, such like that, to appease them. There's still problematic negotiations out there in terms of the contract. So that's something that we're still working away, and also, mediating between the parties. So we encourage that to, to put across to our team, and so ensure that we are working across the board here. And lastly, we still often see, and this is really big still, unresponsive infrastructure owners. Upon receiving a notice during the process and such, there's still quite a few that are still unresponsive. Now, there may be reasons behind to it, such as personnel changes and such. So if that's the case, if there's personnel changes within your, corporation and such, reach out to our team. Ensure to get that contact list updated on our side, so we ensure we're sending the information to the right contact that would answer, the notices at a timely manner. Keep in mind there is a legislative requirement for you to provide a response. So we want to go to that route. Now, the theme for this month's Q&A is more so directed to, speaking to the point of view of compliance. What Adam said here, we have our guest speaker query officer from our CAPE team. So what I wanted to share with you today, just to lead into that, is just, you've seen multiple flow charts in the past sessions that we've had. Those flow charts are more so the deal submission flow chart, which really differs to what I'm sharing with you today. This is a flow chart that is showing, steps and process where it's a high level from escalation to where it leads into compliance in our team in this sense, right? So, if we take it up, the first section there, obviously we know there's a notification that gets sent out to entire one call, then we send out a notice to underground infrastructure owners. From that point, and you do have the 10-day requirement. 10-day requirement to work with the project owner to agree on the DLSP, and also provide mapping and information that's required for the DLSP. Now, to that 10-day, we have certain trigger points to sort of say what we call them to, is that, if we get non-responsive response since the notice we sent, where's an 8-day and a 10-day notices that we'll send a follow-up to the infrastructure owner. If we do not hear from that, so the next step there is, we send out a final email to the infrastructure owner on the 10-day. We do attempt to also reach out via phone call if we do have that information onto our system. From there on, and if there's no answers or non-responsive, it goes to an escalation to myself, the supervisor, the team, where I would reach out. I'll try to reach out to the infrastructure owner or to the main contact. And from there, there's a 48-hour timeline to provide a response. Now, in typical cases, is that we do get response, and we end up sorting out to a phone call and such like that, where once again it could have been a simple personnel changes and such. But once again, if scenario here where if there's no answers between all the way through to the escalation email to a supervisor, now we go back to the project owner and kind of just discuss the next steps and process towards to compliance, right? The escalation or the complaint towards compliance. Now, that was just a high-level overview of the flowchart, and just like the other flowcharts that we have illustrated before in the deal submission, there is a lot more that's expanded to that, right? There's multiple scenarios, multiple steps that we as our team here takes on to ensure that we're working with all parties. It does not go through from the 10-day, it does not go through directly to the compliance team and goes to a contravention or anything like that. We assess the situation, we assess the scenarios, whereas we'll try to work with each individual parties involved, the LSP project owner, and the infrastructure owners to mediate that itself. So this really just depicts that expanded form before you even reach to any sort of contravention. So this really helps you to understand and to see that we are here to help you out to find that resolution to many cases, scenarios, and presented. So with that, one thing I want to leave off to this is that I still urge you to have that open communication. That's where it really starts off with. Being unresponsive doesn't really help out anyone in this industry to this process itself. So let's have those open start communication. Let's work our way through this. With that, I'm going to lead on to our next presenter here. I'm going to leave the baton to Corey Officer, our compliance and improvements performance supervisor. He'll take us on to give you a bit of more insight of the contravention to DL for compliance side.
Thank you, Marco. Good afternoon, everyone. So as Marco mentioned, my name is Corey Officer. I'm the supervisor of the compliance and industry performance team here at Ontario One Call. So today I'm going to take some time to discuss 3 contraventions related to dedicated locator that typically make their way to the CAPE team. And I also just wanted to mention Adam at the beginning of the webinar spoke about the consultations from the Ministry of Public and Business Service Delivery. So they're just requesting feedback from the stakeholders on possible DL exemptions. The link could be found in the chat, but I will be focusing on my presentation on the legislation that currently exists today. Before I move on, I just want to quickly touch on the escalation plan that Marco just presented. So the CAPE team and the DL team worked together on this escalation plan. We wanted to make sure that underground infrastructure owners are given every opportunity to be compliant, making sure that we're communicating and that both lines of communication are open between the project owner and the underground infrastructure owner and all of that, and then with DL as well. So, like Marco mentioned, communication is super important, and unresponsive conduct is not good in the eyes of compliance. So just moving on to the next slide, please, Marco. Thank you. So on this slide here, I'm going to talk about designated broadband projects. So project owners can choose to use the Ontario One Call dedicated locator model for any project on a voluntary basis. However, every broadband project where funding in full or in part was provided through the Ministry of Infrastructure for the purpose of deploying high-speed internet infrastructure on or after April 14th, 2022 is considered a designated broadband project and is required to comply with the dedicated locator provisions under Section 7 of the Act. So this is determined by the execution date, which is any project where the project owner and government have officially signed an agreement for funding on or after April 14th, 2022. So April 14th, 2022 is the date that the DL provision of the Act came into force, meaning any project where an agreement was signed prior to this date is not caught by the legislation. Locate requests for designated broadband projects cannot be submitted through the public stream. The Ontario One Call rules for members and excavators states that an excavator that has abused the locate system by providing information that is inaccurate or misleading to Ontario One Call may be subject to administrative penalties, education programs, and compliance investigations. Excavators submitting locates for designated broadband projects through the public stream rather than directly through the dedicated locator model are seen as abusing the locating system. This could also result in a reprimand, a requirement to change business practices, and more. Next slide, please, Marco. So the next contravention here is on the dedicated locator selection. So once Ontario One Call has received a 90-day notice of a project, the dedicated locator team will notify all affected infrastructure owners within 3 business days of that project. Affected underground infrastructure owners means any underground infrastructure owner where their infrastructure is within the vicinity of the proposed excavation for that particular project. Once notified by Ontario One Call, the affected underground infrastructure owners and project owner have 10 business days to agree in writing on a dedicated locator who will be responsible for responding to all notifications sent by Ontario One Call for that project. This is the contravention that we tend to see the most in compliance. Many underground infrastructure owners want to finalize their contracts and training requirements prior to this step, but all of that can be negotiated following the agreement and selection of a dedicated locator. So it would be best to make sure that you're meeting your legislated requirement as an underground infrastructure owner within that 10-day period, and then figuring out the training requirements and the contracts after that. The dedicated locator selection agreement should be signed and in place, like I said, within the 10 business days, which is the requirement. If this is not done within the 10 business days, the UIOs and project owners are contravening the requirement under subsection 77A and could be subject to compliance action, including but not limited to administrative penalties, which could be $250 per contravention per day. Next slide. Thank you. So finally, the third contravention that we tend to see the most in the compliance team is providing mapping and information to the dedicated locator. So within the same 10 business days as the selection for the dedicated locator, the legislation states that the affected underground infrastructure owners shall give the DLSP mapping information, such as the location of their infrastructure, and any other information that the DLSP considers necessary. Ontario One Call understands that providing mapping and other information can take some time. Therefore, we don't typically push the 10-day requirement for this provision of the Act, as long as the affected underground infrastructure owners are working with the DLSP and the DL team to provide mapping and any other necessary information. There is no need for CAPE to step in. However, if the CAPE team receives an allegation stating that the UIO has not provided mapping or any other information that the DLSP considers necessary and is refusing to move forward with the legislated timeframe, we will investigate reactively. If mapping is not provided within the 10 business days, or the UIO is refusing to work with the DLSP or the DL team to adhere to the Act, the UIO would be contravening the requirements under subsection 77B and could be subject to compliance action, which also includes an administrative penalty of $250 per contravention per day. And so that's it for my presentation. I'll hand it back to Marco.
Okay. No, thank you for that, Corey. That was very informative. To understand all the contravention for the Cape team, and to understand, each legislative requirements for underground infrastructure owner. So at this time, it is an open forum, to ask the questions to our presenter, to ourselves, or to share your knowledge or experience through this. And yeah, we'll go from there. One thing I wanted to do is in previous sessions, I know we have had mic issues. So I just want to ensure that every users here, every attendees here have the access to the mic and unmute yourself. So therefore, if you're comfortable to speak out or share your feedbacks or anything, feel free to unmute. The chat is working right now, so if that is still not working, let us know through the chat. But yeah, I'll leave the floor right now open for any questions.
Hi, Marco. We do have one question here in the chat. It might be directed at Corey. The question is, what is compliance's approach for scenarios where mandated DL work is being submitted through the public stream?
Yes, so our approach is very similar to all the other contraventions of the Act. So we encourage you to submit a complaint through our complaint portal, and we typically get to complaints within 24 hours. Typically, it's less than 24 hours, but we typically respond within 24 hours, and we would investigate the matter. We have Marco and his team, as well as IO, have provided us with mapping to determine which members should be using the the designated broadband DL model. And so with that information, we can determine the execution date, and then from there we would issue an investigation and move them towards the dedicated locator model.
Okay. I want to expand on that a little bit, Corey.
Sure.
One of the things that we come across with is that, what are some of the, we have these designated broadband projects coming through, submitting their local requests and whatnot. What are some of their leverage points, that a telecom can use to gain compliance of 100% written approval from all the affected members through the DL steps, right? We've seen some infrastructure owner clearly just declines or, the request itself or unresponsive. That really halts the project itself and the expansion itself. So what's the compliance take in that sense when that occurs to a designated broadband project opting into DL, but it's holding up the process due to several infrastructure owners that just declines or just unresponsive? Oh, you're on mute there, Corey.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Yeah, so if there's a scenario where an underground infrastructure owner is not selecting a dedicated locator, all the other affected underground infrastructure owners have agreed to this DLSP, and we just have one holdout there. We would encourage the project owner to submit a complaint, and then we would investigate further. So it we just want to make sure that there's progress being made. We want to make sure that these projects are up and running and that the legislation is working as it was supposed to. So if there's a completely unresponsive member, then that would appear to be poor conduct, and we would be potentially taking more of a serious compliance action like an administrative penalty. We haven't gotten there yet, but something else that I'd like to mention is that if you are an underground infrastructure owner and you're worried about administrative penalties, we communicate a lot with the contravening party. An administrative penalty would not come as a surprise. Typically, when we issue a notice of investigation, there's a lot of time for commentary and discussion back and forth. And so if there's a willingness there to correct the behavior and to work towards a solution, that's very important in the eyes of compliance.
Thank you so much, Corey. I appreciate it. We do have another question. We have, what is the average percentage of ticket escalation to the asset owner from dedicated locators when they have issues with the mapping or locating the assets in the field? So it did say average percentage, but if you could speak to that, that would be great.
Sorry, Cheryl, correct me if I'm wrong. How many cases or projects that DL has that are escalated to compliance? Is that correct?
Yes, and in particular, so ticket escalation is what's said here, when there's issues with mapping or locating assets in the field.
So in terms of mapping, so of the three contraventions that I had mentioned, the designated broadband project, DLSP selection, and mapping, and it seems to be the one that we have the least issues with. So the average is quite low. We haven't received many. We've also the CAPE team has worked with the dedicated locator team on processes to improve, and I think that together we've really made an improvement within both teams, and complaints have actually decreased over the last 2.5 months. So at the beginning of peak season, we were seeing quite a few complaints trickle in, but we've definitely seen an improvement over the last 2-3 months. I hope I answered that question.
Great, no,
You
I
did,
thought
you
that was
did.
great.
Okay.
You know, just to touch point on that a little bit, on my presentation that I did indicate, in terms of the mapping improvements, you know, just speaking of on that sense, when it gets to that portion, we do work hand in hand with the CAPE team, and our team here is also working with the underground infrastructure owner, kind of just understanding, you know, what they have on hand, and to what is, you know, what the DLSP can work with. In most cases, there's a lot of unique cases that we've gone through to kind of progress forward and work towards improvements of the mapping for that particular infrastructure owner. So in that sense, we haven't really, you know, very minimal in terms of getting to that point of where the request of the mapping goes through compliance. In most cases that we've seen, we sort of iron it out from our side of things, you know, in unique ways to provide that mapping for the project to move on in that sense.
Thank you so much, Marco. We have another question here. So it notes that the focus currently is all on underground infrastructure owners' compliance. Is there a consideration for a time frame for DLSP's non-compliance? So that's a question. On a side note, an example would be not acknowledging training, skill sets, or data sharing agreements.
Did you want to take that, Marco? I could go.
Yeah, no, I can take a part of that.
Sure.
You know, it's a very, very good question towards to that directly. In this sense, it's not a process through compliance at the moment. It's something that we really work with the industry. It is, you know, even though we're 2 years in, the entire industry is still working towards to it. So, if we come across any situations like this, such as a DLSP non-compliance and acknowledging, or you know, the trainings and the skill sets and such like that, and providing those information, reach out to our team. You know, in most cases, we do have touch points with the project owner. We do have touch points with those DLSPs that are within these process. So we have firsthand to understand, you know, the processes that they're going through on their side of things, and also understand, you know, if you allow us or you inform us, allows us your concerns or some of the things that you may not be hearing from them. So this is where the gap of communication could be crossed out, and you know, having that transparency across the board. So if you're not hearing from that DLSP certain timelines or timeframes and such, reach out to our team. We'll be able to reach out for that.
Yeah, and from a compliance perspective, sorry. So the requirements under the Act are specifically for underground infrastructure owners. So the provisions of the act that I spoke about were subsection 7.7, and that requires the member and project owner to agree in writing to a DLSP. The next one is for the member to provide mapping to the DLSP. So those are requirements for members. There aren't really any requirements under Section 7 that require the dedicated locator to do something. So, but that being said, if members have a genuine safety concern on that's something that we take into consideration. It's something that has come up in the past. There have been members that do have safety concerns. And so we address those concerns through our investigations, through the dedicated locator team. Safety is top priority. So when it comes to those concerns, it's something that we really want to hear. However, when it comes to training and skill set and data sharing, that is something that you would work out in your contracts and your agreements with the DLSP. Those are not requirements under the Act. So we, as the compliance team, there's nothing that we could generally do about those particular items.
All right. Thank you so much, Marco and Corey. I'm going to go on to our next question here. Is the time for negotiation and execution of DL agreement between member, DL, and project owner taken into consideration as part of the 10-day timeline for member to respond and provide records after DL request notification is received? In note that it's a very short time here.
So I think what he's asking about is negotiations for contracts. Is that correct? Between the DLSP?
Yes.
Okay.
I
So
believe they're referring to the agreements. Yes.
yes. So like I had mentioned, unfortunately we can only work with what's provided in the legislation. So the 10 days is sort of set in stone. But like I mentioned, you can still agree on a DLSP and then work out those contracts and the training requirements following the agreement of the DLSP. And if what I would encourage is if that 10-day timeline is not realistic, then you could provide feedback to the ministry, and that could be a possible change to the legislation if the legislation is ever revisited.
So I just want to touch base a little bit on that one. In most cases, the deal agreements, really sets out the escalation process, liabilities and such like that. And, once again, it's not covered under our act or our legislative requirements in our sense. But, having that preparedness, that framework on how you want to assess a dedicated locator, right? So that's what the 10 days really is for. And what we're saying we're working with is that the agreements between the project owner and the DLSP in this sense. And how do you achieve that within the 10 days? It's just achieving that, having a checklist for yourself of how you want to assess a DLSP for you to agree within that 10 days. Any other portion of the agreements, contractual executions, mapping, and such like that can we work towards, the next step, right? And that's where we're able to work with the flexibility timeline where it doesn't have to be within the 10 days, but as long as there's progressions and there's contacts between both parties and progressing forward, to the end goals of providing mappings and, full execution, we are fine with that as long as it's within the timeline of the notice itself. In cases here, the project owners provide us 90-day notice. But within that 10-day framework, to have you prepared, come up with that onboarding process. How do you assess, an upcoming dedicated locate service provider for that project for you to agree within that 10 days?
Thank you so much, Marco. Okay, we have a very situational question. So I'll ask it and then you can let us know if there's any details you can dive into here. So what if a DLSP is also the subcontractor for the project owner? and they are not marking the buried infrastructure that they have that was given to them to the DLSP with accurate GPS mapping. Or what if they are saying that it is not locatable even though there is tonable tracer wire on the infrastructure? So I guess this question is speaking to what if an underground infrastructure owner is finding that the DLSP isn't following proper procedures?
So, Corey, I'll let you take on that
Yeah.
for a compliance perspective, and then I'll take a shoot at it afterwards.
Yeah, so that's it would be difficult to answer that question without all the details. So what I would suggest is if you come across a situation like that, reach out to compliance right away. And then we can look into it a little bit more. Um, I would prefer not to answer a scenario-based question without the specifics. But
Yeah.
if I believe it was Catherine that's maybe
Yeah.
submitted the question. So if you want to send me an email, we could discuss that for sure.
So I'll just cover that as well too. Just same thing with Corey says. Just notify both teams here, compliance and DL team, that we can assess the project that is in question, the DLSP on that, and then we can work together as a team here to find a solution or find the right path for it.
All right. Thank you very much for attempting that one there. So please reach out to our DL team here. I believe we've hit most of the questions in the Q&A here, unless there's a follow-up.
I think there's one there, Cheryl, for Monica. Did we
Okay.
cover that yet? Yeah.
Thank you so much. I will dive into this. I think it has to do with the 10-day window as well. So within the 10-day window, can a underground infrastructure owner agree with the choice of the project owner's DLSP, but with a written provision that the underground infrastructure owner's contract with the DLSP with our specific requirements is pending finalization? That is for the contract to be finalized sometime after the 10 days.
So what the act specifically says here, I'm just gonna pull it up. Sorry, I should have already had this up. I apologize. So the requirement is within 10 business days after receiving the notice under subsection 6, the affected members and the project owner shall agree in writing on a locator with who will, respond to all notifications made by the corporation in respect of the project. So what we're looking for to satisfy that requirement is an agreement. We're looking for an agreement in writing on between the underground infrastructure owner and the project owner. If you would like to stipulate that the specific requirements are pending finalization, as long as you're agreeing to a DLSP and then you're working towards providing mapping, that would satisfy our need.
Okay, sorry, one just came up here, so I'm going to jump into this next one here. Has there been any underground infrastructure owner issued an AMP, so administrative monetary penalty for late locates completion since the AMP inception this year?
So far I won't go into detail because we're here about dedicated locator, but we did post on our website. There's a page now where we post administrative penalties that we've issued. So I believe it's under the compliance and industry performance tab. You can go there and see all of the administrative penalties that we've issued one thus far. So it can be found there. And I'll leave it at that. So you can find the information on the website.
Thank you, Corey. So that's
No
perfect.
problem.
We can head to the website if we need to. Okay, I have reached the end of the questions here.
Okay, thank you, Cheryl. So we'll just give it a few more minutes here. Any questions that come across the board here, ask them away. You know, it doesn't have to be a question. It could be, you know, some of your experience. Maybe you want to share to, you know, the contractual portion of it, to your steps that you want to share with your colleagues here. We are all underground infrastructure owner in this group here, so it is an open forum for infrastructure owners to understand the steps and process. And then aside from that, you know, up in the board here, you know, we've seen quite a good improvements reaching over to our team for any questions and asks. So please feel free to reach out to us and also our compliance team now if you have any questions towards that.
We have one last in here if we have a moment for it. So could you please clarify if DL model is only created for broadband projects, or members must comply for non-broadband projects as well?
So yeah, the designated broadband projects are mandatory if they've received funding in full or in part with an execution date on or after April 14th, 2022. And then any project owner could choose to voluntarily participate in dedicated locator for any project that they choose.
So
But
just to
members do have to comply if that project owner has selected to opt into dedicated locator, then the member must comply.
yeah, that's correct. So any formalized notification that's coming directly from Ontario One Call, regardless if it's the designated broadband project or just a project owner just submitting it to opt into dedicated locator, that is you must comply under this act. Okay, great. No, I think we had a really great session. You know, I do encourage you guys to keep coming to our monthly session, and I do appreciate for those returning attendees. We'll host one again in the coming month, and also our trade show coming up on September 9th and 10th. Correct? Am I getting that dates right, Corey? So if this is something you're interested with, just go to our webpage. There is a section there for, you know, to register to our very first own trade shows. So we welcome your attendees there. Oh, I think we have one more question that came across there. Cheryl, you want to just bring that across?
Hi, yes, I can definitely do that. So we, an underground infrastructure owner, signed a DL agreement many months ago, but the DL is not starting to use it. How can Ontario One Call assist with this?
Okay. Very good question. This is one of those scenarios where we have delayed projects. You know, as per the legislation, we have to have a 100% approval between all underground infrastructure owner before we allow the project to proceed under the dedicated locator program. In most cases, you know, we've seen some projects have some hiccups between, you know, several infrastructure owners to you know, to get the final mapping or you know, just to get that final approval. In that sense, the project is unable to opt into dedicated locator until we get those underground infrastructure owner on board. So in those kind of scenarios, we do work hand in hand, you know, through our team to mediate this the scenario. In most cases as well too, that we do include our CAPE team's assistance in this and kind of figure out the approach. But definitely that will be the scenarios in that case. And definitely we look at all, you know, pathways for us to move forward for that.
I'm not seeing any more come through.
Okay. Perfect. Well, I do appreciate everyone's time again this afternoon that you've given to us. You know, I'll give you guys 10 minutes back to your day. But once again, I appreciate you coming on board here and joining us for our July Q&A session. We look forward to more with you guys. You know, and hopefully we can see you in our trade show in September. All right. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.